So yesterday, had a lot of feels with a lot of the talks. I'm not ashamed to say I cried during the Flower House presentation, and that I am regularly brought to tears with the work that Fly does in Ypsilanti. So art, I think, everyone expects the feels from art. So I'm here today to give you some feels about technology. How many of you have been in the hospital before? Show of hands. Okay. How many of you have had a child in the hospital before? Okay. So I think most people in this room, in one way or another, can relate to what it feels like to be in the hospital. Maybe anxiety, how overwhelming it can be, how confusing it can be. I want you to meet Ivy. Ivy's 3.5, and like a lot of toddlers, she jammed a bunch of crap in her ear. No big deal, right? Quick trip to the urgent care, someone will pull that stuff out, and we can be home in time to watch SpongeBob. But after 6 hours in the ER, the doctor strapped Ivy to that blue thing, which is called a papoose board. It's a Velcro thing to hold her still, while 3 other nurses and technicians pinned her down, and an ENT attempted to dig the stuff out of her ear. This was incredibly traumatizing for Ivy. This was incredibly traumatizing for her mother. And I know this because I'm her mom. And this story isn't unique. Well, every hospital in the country has this thing. Eventually, she had to be sedated and brought to the OR to have a bunch of crap removed from her ear. I hear from parents all the time horror stories that this is happening, about restraints and sedation used to get kids to cooperate with simple, basic treatment, because treatment is scary and sometimes painful for kids. This is not, let me just say, a sign of a bad hospital. This is pretty standard, and it's been standard for a very long time, which is why we want to change it. So if no one wants these solutions, what do we do? Well, technology, yay! Technology has the power to do a lot of crazy things. It has the power to create zombies. And this is often spoken of negatively, but if it has the power to create zombie-like attention, is it powerful enough to divert attention, to turn them into zombies, and refocus away from negative aspects of treatment onto things that make kids really want to pay attention? So I started a technology company called SpellBound, and it uses augmented reality technology to help kids cope with the hospital experience. If I press it again, will it play it? Yes, okay. So augmented reality, if you don't know what that is, it's when you add digital experiences, often 3D, digital experiences to the real world. So you see here, we're using a mobile device to view a plain paper card, and it's bringing that card to 3D life. It's putting a 3D line on that. And with augmented reality, the child, anybody, can interact both with the digital world and that physical world simultaneously. So we frequently bring items like children's books or cards or even wall decals, stickers, to 3D life. Hospital therapists use this. We found out along our journey that this was so immersive and so engaging that it actually worked to get kids to just hold still during simple procedures, whether it's a blood draw or an x-ray. So this was a really cool thing. And it really also is very motivating to them. So kids might actually participate in their treatment in a positive way. What's also cool about what we do is it is really a perfect blend of art and technology. So we need lots of different people with lots of different talents. Like for a small tech startup company, we actually have a music composer on staff. And we have a lot of artists and designers, whether they can do traditional graphic design for the cards, or illustration, or 3D modeling and animation, and creating music and sound engineering to create really a whole virtual world experience that these children can experience through mobile devices. So these are shots of like how we would bring a lion to life. Someone might sketch it and envision what that lion's supposed to be, and then vectorize it or turn it into polygons and bring it in, import it into our gaming engine on the back end, and eventually create this model that can be interacted with. But what's most important about augmented reality is it's about the experience. It's not about the technology, it's not about the art. It's that perfect storm of how it comes together and how it creates these immersive moments. So I'm going to tell you a couple stories about how it's been used. On the left is Ivy, again, because she's my kid and I can take pictures of her all I want. But this was a very simple, harmless thing. She had to have a sleep study done. And that's the thing where you get 27 leads glued to your head and body, a cannula put up your nose, your head wrapped up like a mummy, and then you're told, go to sleep, we're going to collect data. And so as you can imagine, a toddler doesn't usually want to hold still for this. It's not a painful experience, it's a scary experience. And when the patient doesn't cooperate, those two technicians, who it usually takes about an hour to do this for a toddler, their schedule gets pushed back, other patients don't get prepped in time, it can ruin a whole night's worth of sleep studies. But when we allowed Ivy to play with SpellBound, create these 3D worlds on top of her children's book, she just sat there and let them do it to her. She was so immersed in what she was doing, it took half the time and there wasn't a single tear. On the right, at the top, is a young girl being held by her mom. This is actually called comfort positioning, and they're using SpellBound with a different book. The person on the left is the child life specialist, a certified therapist in the hospital to help kids cope with the experience. And the person on the right is the nurse who is about to do terrible things to that child. No, she's about to help that child. Well, right? But from the perspective of the child, you walk in, you have no control over anything, you don't understand what's happening, these are terrifying, and then eventually you realize some of this stuff is painful. So to help not only that child get through using distraction, what's often called distraction therapy, the therapist brought in SpellBound, but it also gave the mother a really positive way to participate. And as a mother, I know I'm frequently in the background when something's going on, like, is it okay? Is it okay? Like trying to help, but actually making things worse. And the patient on the bottom right, his name is Jack, and he was 7 when he had a brain aneurysm. Jack had surgery, had to go through a lot of stuff, and before he can go home, he has to relearn how to use his hands and arms. For a 7-year-old, not being able to do things that a baby can do, like feed himself, like incredibly, incredibly frustrating. But therapy for Jack wasn't fun. Jack didn't care about the therapist's goals. I don't want to move this clothespin 27 times because my occupational therapist told me. So this was at CS Mott Children's Hospital. The therapist gave Jack SpellBound, and they used it as a way of encouraging him, like move these 3D characters in space. Hold your arm at the height that you would need to be able to brush your teeth, because he can't go home until he can brush his teeth. And it was fun for him. And it was distracting enough that he didn't pay attention to sometimes the pain, because it was hard to relearn, but most of all the frustration of the situation he was in. It was giving Jack a little bit, some semblance of control. For us, so these kind of things kind of happened organically, and now it's not just about distraction, although distraction is the core of everything we do, but there are more applications for augmented reality, and we encounter them every day when we meet patients and therapists and doctors and nurses. And so thinking about how we can help kids participate more effectively in physical therapy or occupational therapy or in a dentist's office, and think about all the situations a child might walk into where it's scary or anxiety-producing. There's so much opportunity for augmented reality. We get stories and requests all the time for adults, too, because what's on in the waiting room when you go in the hospital? The news. Yeah, that's relaxing. But for veterans who maybe have come back with PTSD or have had an amputation and have to relearn how to imagine themselves coming back into the world, there's enormous power in the application of this technology. So what I'm going to share is a couple of lessons that, as a company, we have learned about combining art and technology for healing. I'm going to share a lesson, maybe some stuff in the real world, and then how we learned the lesson. And I want to harken back to something that Lynette and Thea said when they were talking about homeschool and the Fly Art Center, was really about the journey and the importance of the journey, and it wasn't about the product at the end. And that I guess is our overarching theme, is that on all these encounters that we've had, we've learned these little lessons, but for us it was about the journey. So play is serious business, and it's been said that it is the work of the child, and this is true. This is what their job is, to how to learn to develop, how they learn to engage with the world, how they learn to develop emotional boundaries and understand physics. Like, this is how they learn to fall and get up again. But what's the first thing that goes out the window when they are brought into the hospital? Play. You walk into a room and maybe it's cool for a second. Look at all those lights and buttons and, oh, I want to turn that knob and don't you touch that. Like, the hospital environment is not conducive to play. And so for us, as a company that's trying to bring imaginative play in for those kids and really kind of create an imaginative play environment, we have to remember that we're going into a very serious situation. How are we going to remember as a company to always infuse play in those products and everything we do? So it's important to practice what you preach. So culture was very important to us. In the world, accepted practice, how many people have heard of the Lego Serious Play Initiative? Oh gosh, you guys got to go look this one up. It's super cool. Like, you get a bunch of Lego and you bring it into your office and you do a bunch of cool activities. And it's really about encouraging creativity. It's about encouraging teamwork. It's about encouraging unique ways of problem solving. And so this is actually, like, big papers have been written on this, but about the value of play in the workplace. So we play. Sometimes it's competitive play, Rock'em Sock'em Robots. Sometimes it's cooperative play or role playing. We're playing Dungeons and Dragons in the upper right-hand corner, complete with costumes in the shared co-working space, a conference room that has glass walls. And sometimes we have very physical play, which is Foursquare in the back alley at the park next door. But this is all ways that we can work through problems or give ourselves a mini break, let some latent learning happen, because sometimes we have to absorb a lot of serious things and turn that into a playful product, which can be hard. Really, for us, about perception overpowering reality. So there's been studies on virtual reality, and there's some things coming out with augmented reality about perception of pain. And when children are immersed in a virtual reality environment, they can perceive pain 33% less. And you think about kids with chronic diseases like sickle cell anemia that experience high level of pains every day and are on opioid drugs all the time. This looking for solutions that don't involve drugs, that give them relief and release, but also this a world full of imagination and wonder that's innate to a child. This is super powerful. And so understanding this power of perception for us, it was about thinking we can't change the negative aspects of hospitalization. There's nothing that can change some of that. But we can change the way they perceive it, the way they remember it. We can change the stories that are told about hospitalization. And if you ever had a family member who came out and told you horror stories or how upset or fearful they were or angry they are, we want to change those emotions. Because after all, the hospital is the place that is trying to get you to be well. These people want you to be healthy and happy. So in the world, there's a lot of misperception in it. Tarek talked yesterday, and he showed a slide that was very powerful to me about there was a riot, and there was a man throwing a fiery something or other, and that it was this misperception of the police thought he was attacking them. He was part of this chaos in this riot, and what the man was doing, for those of you who missed it, was like getting a fiery something out of the way of children. And this is the lens of perception that we deal with. I was going to read you a long thing from Stephen Covey, and I probably can do it. But in Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, I have none of those habits, but the book didn't have any impact on me except for this story. And these are his words, so I'm going to actually read it. Oh, it's all totally right here. So he said, I remember a mini paradigm shift I experienced one morning on a subway in New York. People were sitting quietly, some reading newspapers, some lost in thought, some resting with their eyes closed. It was a calm, peaceful scene. Then suddenly a man and his children entered the subway. The children were so loud and rambunctious that instantly the whole climate changed. The man sat down next to me and closed his eyes, apparently oblivious to the situation. The children were yelling back and forth, throwing things, even grabbing people's papers. It was very disturbing. And yet the man sitting next to me did nothing. It was difficult not to feel irritated. I could not believe that he could be so insensitive as to let his children run wild like that and do nothing about it, taking no responsibility at all. It was easy to see that everyone else on the subway felt irritated too. So finally, with what I felt was unusual patience and restraint, I turned to him and said, "Sir, your children are really disturbing a lot of people. I wonder if you couldn't control them a little more." The man lifted his gaze as if to come to a consciousness of the situation for the first time and then said softly, "Oh, you're right. I guess I should do something about it. We just came from the hospital where their mother died about an hour ago. I don't know what to think, and I guess they don't know how to handle it either." Can you imagine what I felt at that moment? My paradigm shifted. Suddenly I saw things differently. And because I saw differently, I thought differently. I felt differently. I behaved differently. My irritation vanished. I don't have to worry about controlling my attitude or my behavior. My heart was filled with the man's pain. Feelings of sympathy and compassion flowed freely. "Your wife just died? Oh, I'm so sorry. Can you tell me about it? What can I do to help?" Everything changed in an instant. And this is what we are trying to do in terms of changing perspective, building empathy, and understanding walking into a situation that you know nothing about, that you want to help with the solution. The first thing is understanding. So for us, we use a really cool tech. So this is how we learned about our power. We use really cool technology that actually adds qualities to the real world that aren't normally possible. You can hold a 3D digital lion in your hand. And if you guys want to see it later, we've got cards. There's like several team members here that you can play with it. But so when we can do things that aren't normally possible, when we can transform your world your room into an undersea adventure or a jungle or a space, this gives kids a feeling that the impossible can be achieved. And for a child that's facing disease or illness, this can be something as small as being able to raise your arm to hold up a sign to ask a superhero to give you a high five. So changing perception for us, learning that, giving kids an opportunity to believe it can happen and to gut through the tough stuff. So our last lesson is about falling in love with the problem and not the solution. For us, we need to have constant contact with the people, the therapists, those children, and this can be painful at times. But this is the only way for us to understand. And so how do we, as a mother, I don't want to walk in there some days and watch or hear the stories, because it's hard for me. But we need to understand how those scenarios are changing all the time, all the new situations that those kids are coping with. And my famous example out in the world where someone has lost that focus, it was Sears. Sears was a company that started the catalog, the first home order system back in the 1800s. And for the next 100 years, they dominated. People could order clothing, equipment, stuff for your home, and have it delivered to their home through this catalog. And Sears was famous for it. When I was little, that was where we got our school clothes, the Sears catalog. So then how could something that was so popular, that dominated everything, that had the infrastructure of distribution and warehousing and the clientele, just have faded away so quickly when a new person came in? It was because that they forgot what the real problem was. And now the problem changed over time. And they became so focused on their solution that the catalog was a thing that people loved. They lost contact with that. And so this is my famous example that, consumers changed over time, and Sears is dying and stores are closing, and it's not going to be around. And what a wasted opportunity for them. So we stay focused. We stay focused in understanding that we are helping children, that we are helping families, and that we are helping healthcare providers. In order to do that, we have to stay in contact with sometimes those painful stories. I'll give you one last painful story because I don't want to tell anymore. But to illustrate is, I was talking to a woman who one day just talking about the business, and surprised me. She burst into tears and she told me the story about her son who has cerebral palsy. And she said that he had to go regularly, very frequently, into the hospital to have injections in his leg. And he was young, and of course, as time went on, it became more and more traumatic, and he fought against it. And she said every week we would go in there, and they would bring this wonderful nurse, who was a big teddy bear of a man, out, and he would talk to my son a bit, and then he would lay down on top of my son. and pin him down while my son had the injections. And you can imagine, as a parent, how the guilt and how awful you feel. Can you imagine as that child how terrifying that moment was? But can you imagine that nurse? He did not sign up for this. He went to school to help people get better. And so we have to remember these stories when we do our work every day. There's got to be a better way to do this. There's got to be a better way to help these people. So we'll close off happier than I started out. This is Ivy. And again, happy, healthy Ivy. Everything's fine. Her ear healed. And I can just only hope over time that she can begin to build trust with healthcare providers again. It's a typical thing for us to go for follow-up checkups. I'm never going to forget that moment. And I'm never going to forget that moment, that all the moments that drive me from all those patients. And I never want to forget coming home and seeing the wonder in her eyes. Because to a child, the whole world is full of mystery and wonder. How a car works is inconceivable. And so this is how they learn to risk, how to explore, how to be curious. So we want to keep that no matter what they're facing. Thank you.